But when it comes to loving a partner with sexual trauma, this hyper-awareness creates an overcautiousness in the relationship, and it puts the people in this relationship often in this dynamic that drains the connection and the intimacy from the relationship. And that dynamic is about... Welcome back to the It's Kind of Personal podcast. I'm your host, Danny, sex coach and raging homosexual. And today I want to talk to you about how to be more comfortable with your partner's sexual trauma. So we are more aware and openly talking about trauma than we ever have been, right? Even as recently as my parents' generation, trauma was this thing that you got when you went to war. And if you had a rough childhood or emotional trauma, it wasn't just this obvious physical experience such as war or a hurricane, a natural disaster. You were expected to just brush it off, get up, go on about your life. And if you didn't, you were called weak or said you have this mental illness. There's something wrong with you that you just can't bounce back. I assume if you're watching this podcast today, you are aware of what trauma is to an extent, and your partner has told you that they have sexual trauma. And of course, you want to know how to navigate that while supporting them and loving them the best that you can. So you don't need to go study for 10 years to be some kind of trauma therapist to learn how to navigate that with love, care, safety, respect with your partner. You've been taught that trauma is this thing, this big deal to be extra cautious of. So you're super gentle with your partner. You don't overtly flirt with them, grab them. You make sure that when you initiate sex, it's really gentle, and you make sure that you say, well, no pressure. I was in the mood, but if you don't want to, that's totally fine. I'm not going to be mad, right? There's a lot of overqualifying when you initiate sex. You're trying to be extra nice and sweet and gentle because you don't want to trigger them, right? You're so afraid of triggering their trauma that you are doing your very best to make them feel safe and loved and respected. It's great that you care so much about being this great partner because obviously they've had an experience with someone who was a piece of shit, who didn't care about them, right? And you're the opposite, which I think is lovely. And so when you are being extra gentle and cautious and sweet with them, you really feel like you're helping, right? You're doing this because you think it's going to support them. But I'm here to tell you that treating them like a fragile doll is not helping them with their trauma. It's like when you're trying to take good care of a plant. So you water it. Maybe a day comes when you feel like it's extra hot, so you put extra water in the plant and you keep watering it because you're really trying to keep it healthy until one day it starts to wither and die because it's over-watered. It was an accident. The harm to the plant was unintended. And similarly, we're so trauma aware these days, which is a good thing on one hand, but on the other hand, it's led to this overcautiousness and walking on eggshells type of approach to a partner with sexual trauma, and that really blocks intimacy. This very specific thing happens when you have a partner with sexual trauma, and this hyper-awareness of their trauma and trying not to trigger it creates this savior-wounded dynamic in the relationship. And these roles really disempower both of you. So let me explain what that means. Savior-wounded dynamic is when one partner takes on the role of the savior. They want to take care of, rescue, protect the partner who they perceive as wounded, in this case from sexual trauma. And the other partner with the trauma is viewed as the wounded one who needs help, who needs saving, who needs protection. And partners can appoint themselves in the savior role and appoint their partner in the wounded role, or the partner with sexual trauma could accidentally appoint their partner as the savior, looking to them to rescue them from their trauma. Either party can introduce this dynamic into the relationship, and it's often subconscious, right? We don't realize that that's what's happening. So the person in the savior role, they abandon their own needs and they direct all of their focus to quote unquote taking care of the partner who is in the wounded role. And this can make the savior feel important and useful and noble. But over time, the savior loses themselves in the relationship, and their identity becomes the person who is protecting the wounded. The savior can even go so far as to thinking that they know what's best for the person in the wounded role. So they can become a touch controlling or micromanaging. And eventually they start to build resentment because they are sacrificing everything, quote unquote, for their partner, when a lot of the time the partner is not asking them to do that. But the savior feels like that's what has to be done to protect their delicate little flower with the sexual trauma. And this in turn disempowers the partner who is placed in the wounded role. So the partner in the wounded role either feels controlled, micromanaged by the savior, or they themselves overly identify with that wounded person and they are looking to the savior for their emotional regulation, for their decisions, and they're really abandoning their own sense of self and their own intuition and looking to the savior to make all of the decisions and create all of the support for them. But then they lose touch with themselves as well. In this dynamic, this is no longer a functioning relationship because both parties are either consciously or most of the time unconsciously participating in these roles that is just a shell of who they are, right? They've conformed to these roles and they're relating from that place. And that's not authentic, vulnerable connection because they've taken a part of themselves and shoved their entire complexity into this one role that they think is being helpful to the relationship. But it's really draining the authenticity, and it's putting them both in a box and leaving no room for flexibility for the savior to perhaps ask for help and do what they think is great for themselves and not overly worrying about the partner in the wounded role. And it puts the wounded partner in this box of, I don't know what's best for myself. I need you to help me because I don't know how to help myself. And so it's not fun for either person involved. There's this lack of emotional intimacy because you're already thinking of yourself and your partner in these very limited ways, and you're not leaving room for them to show you something else. It's very rigid. I'm here to tell you, as someone with sexual trauma, people with trauma can have great sex too. Okay? They don't need your pity. They don't need you to save them. The worst thing is when someone confides in you about their sexual trauma, and then they feel like they have to caretake for your reaction, right? They brought something vulnerable to you, and now you're extra sad or stressed or worried, and then they have to go out of their way to manage your feelings when they were trying to share something about themselves in the first place. And also, after they share it, if they can feel you treat them differently, or they can feel that you're viewing them differently, even if you don't mean to, right? They can sense that, and it sucks. It just feels like, great, I was trying to share this part of myself, and now my partner has made it my whole identity. Like, I'm just the partner with sexual trauma. Like, who wants to be reduced to the worst thing that's happened to them? Nobody. One way that treating them differently shows up is by holding back your own erotic energy and your desire for them for fear of triggering their trauma. You think that you're doing them a favor by like walking on these eggshells around desire, but really it just ends up making the partner with trauma feel unwanted because they don't feel your desire because you're scared to express it. I was working with a lesbian couple recently, and they had this exact experience. One partner vulnerably shared with me, I want to have sex, but I'm afraid she'll feel pressured and get triggered if I ask. And so I'm so scared of triggering her and making her feel pain that I just don't ask at all. Then her partner said, yeah, I get that, but I still want sex. I'm attracted to you. If I get triggered, I'll tell you and then we can handle it. But I don't want to feel like you're afraid of me. And you could see the partner's face who was in that savior role. You could see her just soften like, oh shit, I thought I was helping, but really I'm making you feel like I don't want you because I was scared of your trauma. And there were tears, they hugged. It was this beautiful moment that we were able to all recognize and talk about together of like, oh, this was a pattern, but it was really blocking the intimacy. Chances are, if you're watching this, you are treating them like a bird with a broken wing, right? This wounded thing that needs extra help and that you need to caretake for them and save them. When what you really need to do is acknowledge them as the courageous person that they are for engaging in healing work, right? For telling you about their trauma, for continuing to live a life despite what they experienced. Acknowledge that courage in them. And while you're at it, acknowledge the courage in yourself for choosing to learn about sexual trauma and how you can show up best for them. You could both bury your head in the sand, never talk about it, and just have this weird disconnected relationship. But if you're here, you are taking the bold move to not do that. And I'm sure your partner is doing the same. Getting more comfortable with your partner's sexual trauma and learning to navigate it is about learning to see them as a whole, full person, not just as their sexual trauma. And this is a foundational piece of what I call the confident connection system. You treat your partner as a capable, whole being that has wants and needs, boundaries, triggers, and sexual desires just like you. You trust them to tell you when they're feeling triggered and need support or need space. And this is what I help my clients do. We practice consent conversations, which means we practice talking about turn-ons, turn-offs, and any known intimacy triggers with curiosity and vulnerability. We also practice how to talk about what kind of support a partner may need if they get triggered. We also practice the skill of attunement. What does that mean? It means that you're able to feel and sense your partner's energy and read how your words and presence are impacting them, and then adjust accordingly if you're not having the impact that you thought you were having or that you want to have. So through this practice, we help you stay connected to yourself while also staying curious about your partner. So you're not trying to abandon yourself and your desires and needs to over-focus on the partner, but we really get to practice creating that balance of, okay, I'm here with myself and I'm here with you. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I don't have to completely jump out of myself and ignore myself to caretake to you. Right? That wounded savior dynamic really shows up here, and we get a chance to rebalance that so that when you are in connection with your partner, they don't feel like a problem to be fixed or a baby bird that you need to care for. They really feel like you're connecting with them from the same level. We also practice repair conversations. So when you do trigger your partner's sexual trauma, and it will happen, I show you how to navigate those conversations. And spoiler alert, it doesn't just mean saying sorry right away and then trying to move on. There's a whole skill set of having a conversation of repair in a way where you feel closer to your partner afterward instead of full of shame and fear. Just one part of my authentic intimacy framework. Along with being trained to work with trauma, I'm also trained to help you find pleasure in connection. We help you rewire the fear response that happens in your nervous system around your partner's sexual trauma. Our bodies have this language that they communicate between each other, often below our conscious awareness. So when you're scared of triggering their trauma, they feel that fear from you. So when we rewire this fear response around your partner's trauma, instead of feeling like a burden or a problem to be solved, your partner feels a real sense of groundedness and acceptance from you on a deeper level. And when they feel your acceptance, this helps them accept themselves more too. Then we help you get clear on what turns you on and remove all the layers of shame that come with that. This does two things. With this specific knowledge of your turn-ons, it helps you reintroduce your erotic side to your partner, which you have likely been holding back. It also sets a great example and an open tone for your relationship, because often people with sexual trauma have an extra dose of shame around their sexuality, more than just people who have gone through this sex negative culture because their sexuality was used to harm them. So when you are openly sharing your turn-ons without shame, this also helps them feel safe to share their turn-ons without hesitation. Your relationship with your partner who has sexual trauma should be the same as how you treat any sexual relationship, which means lots of care, dignity, curiosity, and communication. So if you're like, wow, this makes so much sense, I really want to get out of this savior wounded dynamic with my partner, and I want us to have a thriving sexual connection, book an intimacy checkup with me below. So on this call, we'll explore your biggest intimacy blind spot at the moment, and I'll give you the next right step you can take right after the call to deepen your intimacy. And I'll outline how my authentic intimacy framework can help you create sexual connections of your dreams, even when your partner has sexual trauma. Want to win a free coaching session with me? Review this podcast, take a screenshot of your review, and send it to me, and I will enter you to earn a free coaching session. In a world of censorship and sex-negative culture, reviews really help the podcast get in front of more people so we can create a more sex-positive world. That's okay, I'm almost done.